The USS Paperclip did not so much land on the Snark's homeworld as it belly flopped into the tarmac like a drunk walrus wearing rocket boots. Jenna Briggs, Chief Petty Officer, Navy SEAL, caffeine incarnation, and walking HR violation, was the first human out, mostly because the airlock opened before the ramp fully deployed and she just jumped. Boots hitting cracked stone, she surveyed the welcome committee, 200 pounds of scaly ego per Snarks, each flexing hard enough to sprain a solar system. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their ceremonial loincloths fluttering in the acidic wind like someone had forced gym bros to cosplay as Roman gladiators. One especially bicep-heavy Snarks stepped forward, sniffed the air, and announced in galactic common, "Behold, the chew toy." Jenna blinked, popped a bubble of chewing gum loud enough to make 3 warriors flinch, and smiled. "And you must be the world's angriest collection of emotional support lizards." The translator lagged half a second, which was just long enough for the insult to land, then detonate. A ripple of horrified gasps swept through the crowd, followed by what could only be described as collective sulking. One warrior actually filed something on a datapad. She'd been briefed, of course. The Snark's Dominion didn't negotiate. They issued dominance assertions. They didn't do treaties. They did ceremonial headbutts and roared until someone cried. Which is exactly why Earth's diplomatic corps sent Jenna. Not because she was trained for it, not because she had finesse, no. Because she once made a Gorgle warlord weep during a NATO briefing using only sarcasm and a post-it note that said, "Nice claws, compensating for something?" The Snark's Coliseum loomed in the background, a hollowed mountain ringed with plasma spikes, tribal glyphs, and what Jenna assumed was either mood lighting or an intergalactic rave. She walked toward it like she was heading to a dentist appointment she planned to sue afterward. Beside her, Commander Rick Doyle trudged along, face tight, tablet in hand, whispering frantic reminders. "Please just try not to insult their ancestor spirits again." "I didn't insult their spirits," Jenna replied. "I said if their grandpa's battle tactics were so great, maybe he wouldn't have exploded during a duel with a mining drone." "That's worse, Briggs. Tell it to the mining drone. That thing had style." They were ushered, well, nudged with spears, which Jenna considered flirting, into the arena where thousands of Snark spectators sat in tight clusters, growling emotionally. Borlax, the Overfang, descended from the throne like a reptilian linebacker on a motivational speaking tour. His ceremonial cape looked like it had mugged a velvet sofa. He raised one massive claw and boomed, "You stand in the House of Honor. Mammal. State your purpose, lest we skin you into a treaty blanket." Jenna looked up, squinted, then fished in her tactical pouch. She pulled out a clipboard, slapped a sticky note on it, and held it aloft. The note read, "Official Earth. Envoy. No biting." She paused for dramatic effect, then added in a stage whisper, "That includes passive-aggressive nibbling." The silence was so intense even the wind seemed to duck for cover. Then came the fake laugh. Jenna's fake laugh was a finely honed weapon, sharp, deranged, and clinically proven to cause cortisol spikes in 3 species. It echoed around the Coliseum like a malfunctioning hyena until one warrior dropped his spear, another whimpered audibly, and a third filed an emotional assault form using the emergency grievance app on his gauntlet. Borlax's expression was unreadable, mostly because his species' facial language was a combo of nostril flare, throat sac dilation, and tail semaphore. But Jenna could smell it. Rage, humiliation, and just a whiff of burned ego. "You mock the Snarks?" he growled. "No," Jenna replied, twirling her pen like a dagger. "I diagnose the Snarks. And buddy, this whole empire's got a complex bigger than your moon." The growl that followed was so deep it made the stone beneath her boots shiver. But Jenna didn't flinch. She leaned in just enough to make it clear she wasn't here for peace. She was here to win, with paperwork, petty jabs, and absolutely no mercy. Doyle muttered into his sleeve, probably prepping Earth's legal defense. But Jenna didn't need backup. She had a pen, a punchline, and a mission get transit rights through Snark space, or roast an entire warrior species into emotional submission trying. And if that failed, well, she still had one last card, the emergency thermite pod strapped to her back, labeled in permanent marker, Diplomacy Plan B. By the time Jenna Briggs was escorted, read, aggressively shepherded by twitchy warriors with ceremonial spears that looked suspiciously like rebranded plumbing equipment, into the center of the Snark's Coliseum, she'd already counted 14 distinct dominance rituals, 6 throat sack inflations, and 1 warrior in the stands crying, quietly into what looked like a scale-polished pillow embroidered with the words, "Born to Roar." The crowd chanted guttural war verses, stomping in time like a gym class possessed by a Viking audiobook. In the middle of it all, Borlax stepped forward with the grandeur of a creature who owned 15 mirrors and kissed each one before breakfast. "As is tradition," he thundered, "the outsider must face the Unity Disruption Trial, non-lethal symbolic combat to assess worth, honor, and the ability to not embarrass oneself before the ancestors." Jenna tilted her head. "Unity Disruption Trial. Cute. That's what my mom called family dinners." The translator took a beat to process family dinners into ritual feeding chaos, and one Snark's warrior fainted from imagined trauma. Borlax puffed his throat sack and announced the challenge would commence in 5 minutes. Jenna, not missing a beat, raised a hand. "Wait, terms?" Borlax blinked. "Terms?" "Yeah," she said, popping the tab on a can of liquid espresso concentrate from her tactical belt. "If I win, Earth gets unrestricted transit through your territory and mineral rights on that sacred moon you all pretend isn't just a glorified ashtray." Audible gasps rolled through the Coliseum like someone had insulted their protein powder brand. Borlax scoffed. "You believe you can best me in combat?" "Combat. Oh, honey." She stretched her arms, cracked her neck, and pulled out a tiny, well-worn notepad titled Galactic Roast Protocols, Vol. 2. "I thought this was a roast battle, but if you want to dance, I'm game." Borlax hesitated, nostrils flaring. "This is no verbal exchange. This is the right of disruption, strength of mind, spirit, and dominance." "Perfect," Jenna said, flipping open her notebook, "because all I brought were words and an emotional scalpel." The Coliseum lights dimmed. An overdramatic gong sounded. A Snarks announcer with a flair for theatrics bellowed, "Let the disruption begin." Jenna stepped forward, microphone-shaped translator in hand, and took aim. "Let's start with that outfit, Borlax. That cape? I've seen less velvet in a brothel-themed casino. And your roar? Sounds like a sick blender trying to process shame. And kale." Murmurs spread. A few warriors nodded. Borlax growled, flexing like he thought muscles were arguments. Jenna continued mercilessly. "You Snarks like to talk about pack hierarchy, but your political structure has the stability of a toddler's Jenga tower on a starquake, and dominance displays? Please, if I had a credit for every time one of you asserted authority by chest thumping, I could buy a moon that isn't shaped like a butt." A couple of younger warriors snorted. One choked on his ceremonial protein gourd. Jenna pivoted, walking the arena like a stand-up comic who'd been weaponized. "Let's not even get into your sacred moon. You know what it looks like? An interstellar hemorrhoid. I've seen better real estate in asteroid collision zones." That one landed like a photon torpedo. 3 warriors actually dropped their spears. Borlax tried to respond but only managed a snarl so weak it sounded like a hover fridge dying. Jenna seized the moment. "Your ancestors would be so proud, Borlax. They died in glorious combat, and here you are, getting roasted by a mammal with a caffeine addiction and a stationary budget." Somewhere in the upper tiers, a Snarks elder let out a resigned sigh that translated across species as, "Well, we had a good run." Jenna pulled out a pie chart, technically one stolen from Earth's chili cook-off fundraiser, and hastily relabeled to represent dominance delusion versus actual strategic relevance. She spun it like it was holy scripture. "This," she said, is where your entire empire sits. The slice labeled Roars and Rituals was 98%. The rest simply said, unclear, maybe snacks. The arena went dead silent. Then chaos. Half the warriors began arguing about resource hoarding. The other half began murmuring about how nobody actually knew what diplomacy was, just that they were told it involved a lot of puffing and occasional stabbing. Borlax, cornered in his own coliseum, twitched violently, his eye ridge spasming. "Enough!" he snarled and lunged forward, slashing Jenna's arm with a claw, deep enough to draw blood, shallow enough to be mostly embarrassing. The entire coliseum gasped. Jenna looked at the wound, blinked, and said flatly, "Wow, you broke your own law. What now, big guy? Gonna cry into your cape?" Doyle's voice crackled in her ear. "Briggs, you just triggered a full diplomatic meltdown." "Yep," she said, pressing a bandage to her arm and smirking at the blood now soaking into Borlax's honor rug. "Time to weaponize humiliation." The Colosseum froze in a silence so thick, even the ambient growls and hormonal throat sac wheezes of the snarks tapered off like a galactic mute button had been pressed. Every eye, beady, slit, compound or otherwise, locked on the smear of red, dripping from Jenna's forearm, a drop of human blood soaking into the sacred floor of the trial ring, which by Snark's law was supposed to remain unsullied by foreign ichor, unless the foreigner had been legally dismembered. Jenna calmly peeled a combat patch from her belt, slapped it onto the wound, and stood tall, blood trailing down her fingers, unbothered. "You just violated Protocol 46B, she said cheerfully, voice echoing through the translator. "System now auto-broadcasting on every frequency, which, and I quote, forbids the mauling of visiting species unless legally declared prey via 3 public roars and notarized combat intent." A Snark's legal scribe in the upper tiers instantly fainted. Somewhere to her left, a cluster of warriors began arguing over whether Borlax had issued the correct number of roars. One insisted that the pre-roast growl counted, while another pointed out it lacked the traditional double snort. Jenna didn't. Wait. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a holographic spreadsheet, projected it into the air, and rotated it with the theatrical precision of a stage magician. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted scale-bearers, what you see here is a breakdown of Snark's resource distribution by pack allegiance. Notice anything odd?" The chart displayed dozens of color-coded bars with cheerful titles like War Meat Rations, Dominant Ceremony Budget, and Emotional Scent Candle Allowance. Gasps rippled through the arena. "That's right," Jenna said, pointer in hand. "Seems Overfang Borlax has been reallocating supplies from southern packs to fund unnecessary cape upgrades and personal echo chambers, literally, in one case. I found the invoice." She flicked to a purchase order marked Fang Echo Deluxe Roar Amplifier for the insecure apex who needs to feel bigger. Borlax sputtered. "These are for morale," he bellowed. "Ah, yes," Jenna said, circling him, like a shark in Oakley's. Because nothing says unified warrior culture like defunding the warrior chow line so you can sound like thunder after a bad breakup. A junior warrior stood up and shouted, "I haven't had a meat brick in weeks." Another followed. "My honor spa ration was cut in half." Then another. "He downgraded my ceremonial loincloth to synthetic." Borlax roared, throat sacs glowing crimson. "You dare sow dissent among the Snarks?" "Nope," Jenna replied sweetly. "You already did that. I'm just holding up the mirror, and honey, it ain't flattering." She clicked to the next slide, labeled Diplomatic Alternatives to Screaming. The images included a coffee mug, a whiteboard, and a human child flipping a Snark's diplomat the bird. "Let me educate you," she said, walking toward him. "Humans don't need to be the strongest. We just have to be the hardest to predict. We're chaos in tactical boots. We win by confusing you into questioning your own biology." At that, several Snarks exchanged wary glances, one whispering, "I heard humans laugh when they're in pain." Another added, "I saw one smile while holding a concussion." "Oh, we do." Jenna said, overhearing. Smiling is our warning display. If you see teeth, something's about to explode, or we're about to sue you. Sometimes both. She stopped just a meter from Borlax, the blood from her wound now drying like war paint on her arm. You clawed me. In front of your people. In front of the Galactic Trade Commission's satellite drone, which, by the way, has been broadcasting this live for the last 12 minutes. Say hi to your re-election campaign. Borlax's jaw sagged slightly. A long, painful silence followed. Then a voice from the upper tier, one of the Snark's council elders, croaked. Protocol breach confirmed. Initiate rite of atonement. The elder sounded both gleeful and vindictive, which Jenna appreciated. She turned back to the crowd, spreading, her arms wide. You've built an empire on posturing and puffery. You claim dominance because you shout louder and grow bigger. But power. She pointed at the spreadsheet again. Power is knowing when to whisper and still be heard. Power is wearing a clipboard like a weapon and turning your enemy's rulebook into a loaded gun. The crowd stirred, unsettled. Borlax took a halting step backward, his shoulders slumping, throat sacs deflating with the defeated wheeze of a party balloon in mourning. Jenna didn't smile. This wasn't the punchline. This was the prelude to collapse. Now, she said, voice low and sharp, either you kneel, mop this blood off the floor, and apologize to my entire species, or I publish the full audit of your Cape budget and let the Galactic Taxation Office sort it out. And trust me, you do not want to owe back taxes to beings who eat lawyers for fun. That was the breaking point. One warrior dropped his ceremonial war flag and began chanting, Honor mop, honor mop. Others took it up like a revolution with cleaning supplies. The Colosseum surged with confused righteous unrest. Warriors, rallying behind the weirdest cause since the great protein bar shortage of cycle 3047. Borlax stared around, realizing, far too late, that dominance was no longer in his roar, or his claws, or his garish velvet cape. It had migrated, and it now resided in a coffee-fueled Navy SEAL with a spreadsheet, a wound, and no patience for lizard nonsense. Borlax didn't kneel immediately. Apex pride, after all, didn't shatter with a single spreadsheet. It buckled, like an overcooked bulkhead under pressure, groaning and twitching as the last of his ceremonial ego leaked out in awkward silence. He stood there, surrounded by thousands of Snark's warriors, now murmuring not about conquest, but about tax fraud and synthetic loincloths, his claws twitching uselessly at his sides as the chant of honor mop, grew louder, unified, disturbingly catchy. Jenna, arms crossed, blood-streaked and unapologetically smug, didn't even press. She just stood there sipping from a silver thermos that read, Number 1 Apex Problem, and waited for the laws of humiliation physics to complete their arc. The Snarks had no protocol for this. No flowchart for diplomatic defeat via public mockery in Excel. Yet ancient law, specifically a dusty subsection written after the Great Pelt Forgery scandal, stated that a leader who dishonored the ritual, ring via unlawful mauling, must atone with public submission and ritual cleansing, all of which was about to go live on 17 galactic broadcast nodes and one particularly aggressive Snark's gossip blog. Borlax finally dropped to one knee, then both, his snarl hollow, cape dragging through the dust as warriors gasped and the Elder Council clutched their ceremonial pearls or whatever passed for them, probably fossilized dominance declarations. A tiny cleaning droid wheeled out of a side hatch, but Jenna kicked it back gently with her boot. Nah, she said, pulling a neon-labeled mop from her gear pack and tossing it at his feet. Use the real one. The mop's named Honor. It's tradition now. Borlax stared at it like it was a live grenade, but slowly he reached out, gripped the handle, and began to scrub. Badly, like a warlord who'd only seen mopping in documentaries about defeat. The moment the first swipe hit the floor, a dozen diplomatic sensors pinged compliance. Jenna activated her wrist comm. Commander Doyle, please confirm visual of Borlax mopping my blood off the floor with the ancient rite of humble shame. Confirmed, Doyle replied, audibly stunned. And we just got the clearance ping. Unrestricted transit through Snark space, permanent trade access, and mining rights to the moon you called a space hemorrhoid. Don't forget the commendation, she added. I want that title official. Copy that. Predator pacification via tactical SAS is being filed with Earth's Diplomatic Honors Board as we speak. And they're sending a cake. Borlax, breathing heavily, finished the mop pass and looked up. His voice was a hoarse croak. You dishonor me before my pack, before the galaxy. Jenna crouched in front of him, eye to eye with the 8-foot mass of muscle and shame. No, Borlax, she said calmly. You did that yourself the moment you thought strength was loud and intelligence was weakness. You treated diplomacy like a threat assessment. You assumed humans were prey because we don't roar, but we whisper. We plan. We smile while the galaxy burns and file paperwork so sharp it cuts your legacy in half. You built your empire on fear. I just showed everyone what happens when fear laughs back. She stood, turned to the crowd, and raised a single hand. By the authority of Earth's strategic affairs and the unyielding power of caffeine-based sarcasm, I declare this treaty signed, sealed, and embarrassingly delivered. The Colosseum erupted into confused, half-enthusiastic applause, unsure whether they'd just witnessed a military victory, a stand-up special, or the birth of a new religion involving spreadsheets and passive-aggressive banter. Snark's warriors began dropping their weapons in awkward reverence, unsure whether they were surrendering or enrolling in an emotional awareness workshop. The Elder Council uploaded Jenna's performance into the Galactic Archive, classifying it as a non-violent apex overthrow, with subtags including verbal dominance display, psychological payload delivery, and mammal-induced existential crisis. As the crowd dispersed in dazed groups, Jenna and Doyle returned to the USS Paperclip, which now looked even more like a dumpster with engines next to the gilded landing pads of Snark's nobility. She climbed the ramp, paused, then turned and looked back over the scorched Colosseum floor, where her blood had been mopped with ancient shame. Well, she muttered, sipping from her mug again. That's diplomacy done right. Bleed a little, roast a lot, and leave with the mineral rights. Doyle joined her, shaking his head. Do I even want to know what you plan to do with that sacred moon? First, she said, smirking, rename it to Buttrix Alpha. Then build a coffee refinery shaped like a giant sarcastic grin. They both laughed as the shuttle's thrusters ignited, lifting them above a civilization still emotionally reeling from one Navy SEAL, with a mop, a bleeding arm, and a truly devastating sense of comedic timing. In the transmission logs of the Galactic Trade Commission, the event was officially labeled First Contact Resolution 3097A, Species 42 Hum, reclassified from Crunchy Snack to Oh No.